Saludos, bienvenido al primer video del canal oficial del podcast Espectro Maníaco que pueden encontrar en Spotify, en Apple Podcast y en otras plataformas según tengo entendido. Bueno, el primer video de este canal es una entrevista con el doctor Peter Goertz, de un psiquiatra que trabaja en el Centro Médico Ochsner en Luisiana. Él tiene 28 años de carrera y se tituló en la Universidad de Múnich. Bueno, él tiene un canal de YouTube también. Y mi objetivo era traer la información de su canal acá a la audiencia en español. Eh, tocamos varios temas, pero principalmente los efectos del bullying en la infancia, hacia la adultez y otros temas también que espero que sean de su agrado. Así que eso, espero que la disfruten. Great. Eh, Well, doctor, it's really nice to have you here. I'm very grateful for you to accept my invitation for this interview. I was checking your work. A couple of, well, actually, many of your videos actually resonated with me, and I've been dealing with a lot of uh, talking about the trauma subject in the podcast of the episodes of the podcast. And there was a quote that really found it very revealing. That appears on the episode about child suicide, or suicidal children. When you say bullying is a form of abuse, I know what it means, but I would like you to get a little bit deeper into that so the audience can hear about it.
Okay, so just to back up, I'm not a specific child psychiatrist. I'm a general psychiatrist, adult psychiatrist, but I do see a good amount of children because I cover emergency rooms, and then I see children in emergency rooms, children and adolescents. So as far as bullying being a form of abuse, anything that is in any way, physically, emotionally, financially, taking advantage of someone, demeaning someone, I would see as abuse. So if someone's boyfriend is stealing money from them for drugs, or if a child is being bullied, that all, in my opinion, is in the realm of someone taking advantage of someone or not treating them fairly. So I would consider all of that abuse, from sexual, physical, verbal abuse to bullying, financial abuse. So I see it as a general theme. And unfortunately, that's something I see in many adult patients. If they were, for instance, sexually abused in childhood, often currently, whether they're 30 years old, 40, 50, 60 years old now, there's still some kind of abuse going on. Maybe financially, their partner is not treating them fairly, taking money from them, or they're not being treated fairly at work. They have to work longer hours than other people. They're not being paid as much. So often, if someone has been abused in the past, or bullying is part of that, they may well be more vulnerable to abuse down the road.
Yeah, I was thinking because I worked a little while in child protective services here in Chile, and of course we're taught very early, when our formation as psychologists, about sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, and of course there's this like pyramid of forms of abuse aimed towards children, but always get the impression that bullying always comes last. Like sometimes one child or a teenager will commit suicide because of bullying, and everyone, like the scholar system and the family, will be like, "Wow, how did this happen?" But nobody pay attention. And I mean, I'm talking about kids and teenagers, but there are many adults who carry I mean, not scars, like literally open wounds of bullying like that leads to conditions of PTSD later, and I get the feeling that it's not widely studied, like the overarching effects of bullying from childhood to adults. If you see it that way, I don't know.
That's interesting because in my training as a psychiatrist, bullying was not a major theme. Now it's become more prominent, maybe partly because of a lot of bullying being done via social media. So maybe it's maybe people's awareness of bullying has increased. But like I mentioned in one of the videos, the effects can be devastating. I had a patient, an older gentleman, quite up in age, and still has, I'm not sure if he would qualify for the full diagnosis of PTSD, but he is still suffering in a major way from being bullied chronically as a child. And he would, right on the tip of his tongue, is the name of the boy who bullied him. This is, many decades later. So it's definitely a significant issue and also a safety issue, like you said, because children can commit suicide based to a large extent on having been bullied.
Yeah, I mean it's a very serious situation. You actually said in one of those episodes that bullying can result in suicide, and it's a serious issue. I mean, the scholar system acts very lately. I mean, they obviously more worried about notes, grades, and that kind of stuff. But I mean, at least my experience here in Chile is that they care very little about emotional development of children. I mean, they will hear rumors about kids consuming alcohol and drugs, and they will be like, at least you don't do it here in the four walls of my school. I don't care if you're doing it. I mean, that's the impression I get from the scholar system.
Part of the problem in any major system is that there can be a lot of bureaucracy. So it's difficult for bureaucracies to function sometimes, and sometimes children are sent to an emergency room just because of bureaucratic reasons, what I find at least. That's what I find in my experience. So some children who in the past did something that common sense would say, okay, he's just a child, he said that. But nowadays, because of bureaucratic protocols in school, even those children are sent to emergency rooms. So it can go both ways. I think sometimes people close their eyes, institutions may close their eyes to certain issues, but also because of bureaucratic protocols, sometimes minor issues are issues that lead to children being sent to emergency rooms. So it can go both ways. But like you said, I think awareness is very important, and we want to realize that the bureaucratic part is one part, but in my opinion, we want to focus on what really is best for children, what is best for people, and we want the teachers and the people who work in schools also to enjoy their job.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that's part of the reality that obviously kids and teenagers always make memes mocking the teachers, like because they never paid attention to the bullying actually uh, um, attacking someone. They always act when the bullied victim respond to the aggression. But obviously has to do with the attention span of teachers is pretty much distorted, and because they obviously their job as a teacher is very hard. So and they themselves are being bullied by their own bosses. So it's a very pathological institution, the school in itself. No? I don't know if you see it like that way.
Well, and teachers are often not paid very well. So you have a very good point. The bullying can not only be of children, but maybe it's not bullying in the usual sense, but the teachers themselves can be mistreated. And that can, of course, affect their satisfaction at work. And another thing you mentioned, and that I think is key, when I think back to my school days, First of all, bullying was not something that was taken seriously in our school. I remember when I was in grade school, you would walk into the school and there were kids, fighting was normal, quote, normal. Kids were rolling around on the floor, this was like age 7, 8, 9, 10, fighting. I mean, not trying to kill each other, but wrestling, fighting, tearing at their shirt, getting dirty. Nowadays, you don't see that in schools because of, like I said, the increased awareness and the protocols. So times have changed. Bullying, at least from my school days, was not really paid attention to. The other thing that you touched on that I think is really key is, what do children learn in school? When I was in school, through high school, medical school, everything, there was a lot of attention paid or placed on factual knowledge. Do you know about geography, mathematics, languages, factual knowledge, but knowledge about how to enjoy one's life, accept oneself, knowledge about how to enjoy oneself, how to deal with conflict in the family, for instance, deal with potential negative views about oneself. None of that was ever brought up in school, or maybe very rarely, but not that I recall right now. So schools, I think, the good side of any problematic situation is that there's potential for change. So the fact that still now schools are not necessarily paying a whole lot of attention to the emotional well-being of children, at least that's my sense. They're trying to satisfy protocols, but mainly the focus is on subjects and learning and factual knowledge. But the fact that things are that way, which is difficult for children, means that there's potential for a lot of creative change. And that is a good thing. So pretty much any crisis has a silver lining because there's potential for changing the crisis in a good way.
Yeah, certainly. There are major changes that are to be done in terms of institutions, even government level too, even cultural. I mean, like the fact that bullying is not received enough importance as a major agent of traumatization is one thing that I feel like, well, early stages of that. There's talk about PTSD, and of course, I went full speed ahead with the subject of intervention, but of course, you mentioned something very interesting when you were talking about this adult patient. I mean, if people in the audience will hear about the major symptoms that someone of who develop PTSD through bullying, I mean, what would be the major symptoms that, or the major damage to, like, someone who experiences bullying for a
Well,
long periods of time?
I see in these children is very sad. And I want to get back to a little later, I want to get back to something you mentioned with cultural issues. But to answer this question, what I see in emergency rooms with children is something that can be heartbreaking. You see kids that seem to have a lot of potential, but because of the way they've been treated, they feel like giving up. And nowadays, over the years, so I've been seeing children in emergency rooms during consultations for almost 9.5 years now in this current job. And it seems like recently, maybe due to social media, Snapchat, etc., things, the emotional situation of children who've been bullied is more intense now. So what I'm seeing is children who've reached a point, they've been bullied. When they walk into the classroom, people make comments, and these children at a certain point are just done. They're ready to die. And that's something I didn't see years ago. So this severity and intensity of children being so ultimately finished with trying to deal with life is very sad and, like I said, heartbreaking. So what can happen if someone's bullied? Of course, depression, and they can, of course, be anxious then. They may not want to go to school. And it can get to a point where it reaches the level of major depression, of course, with sleep problems, appetite problems, and even suicidal thoughts, which is the time where I often see these people in emergency rooms. And the parents at times weren't even aware, or were not very aware of the problem being that intense until, let's say, a child cut themselves, or until the issue came up in school that the child was ready to die, ready to kill themselves.
I mean, that's the part that we discussed that in a previous episode, that there's a gender issue. I mean, um, male victims of bullying or traumatization in general are obviously more reluctant to discuss openly these subjects. So, and they obviously, when they have suicidal thoughts and they actually planning the suicide, they sadly are more effective than women. I mean, they always like aspire to the biggest success of the rate of success in their lethality. So obviously, the kids parents sometimes they don't get the red flags. I mean, the kids just committed suicide, and there's obviously nothing else to do and right now. You know?
It can reach that point. Interestingly, I probably see more girls in emergency rooms. I'm not sure why. Maybe because they express themselves more. Often what happens, or at times what happens, is they tell a friend at school, and then the friend tells the school staff, and the child gets brought in. And in general, it may be that girls, and maybe females also, adult females, are more connected with their emotions than men, which may be not correct. Maybe that's prejudice or something that's just not correct. But overall, that may be true. And that touches on cultural issues. That's something else I wanted to mention. You mentioned the culture itself can be set up in a way that's not helpful emotionally for people. And that's something that ties into, for instance, women's role in cultures over the years. In some cultures, just maybe analogous to bullying, you mentioned bullying was not taken seriously. In some cultures, sexual abuse of women was not taken seriously, or abuse in general, beating women was not taken seriously. So now, at this time, I think we have a lot of opportunities to shift things. I think awareness of people has increased, and things are often, like with the children we're mentioning, at a very intense level. So we have the opportunity to address these issues that are now right on the table: sexism, abuse in general, bullying, abuse of women, many others probably. But I think the good side of things being so difficult nowadays is that, like I mentioned before a few minutes ago, there are opportunities for creative change, and it's up to us.
Yeah, certainly there's a lot of to do. I mean, every culture has its own faults and virtues, obviously. I mean, here in Chile, we don't, we're just too poor to afford an opioid addiction, but people drink a lot here. I mean, and and the consume of cocaine has spiked really high. I mean, these days, Latin America is like the early 80s. I mean, it has gone crazy. But I was thinking about kids who actually maybe have suicidal thoughts, and they somehow go beyond that point and somehow manage to live with this demon of PTSD. They internalize, they they develop this internalized monologue, which is something you discuss in another episode when you talk about internal monologue. In monologue is a form of torture. I mean, when people, the victim of abuse, and at what point develop this communion with this abuse they received, and that's obviously brings a lot of detriment to the development of self-image.
That can go from very extreme examples to just mild examples. In previous decades, often girls were not felt to have the potential to have a career, just culturally. So they were told, oh, you need to be a secretary, or no, it's not going to work if you try and become a businesswoman. And that was not uncommon, I think. And these women then internalized that often as girls, and then didn't try to go to college, or just, decided not to go to college and became housewives or secretaries, when part of them, at least, may have really wanted to have a career, but the culture and their specific families did not assist them, did not support them in that. On the contrary, they blocked that, in the sense that if the girl brought it up to her father, for instance, the father may say, oh, that's for people who are different. And maybe the message that the girl received was, often at least, I'm not intelligent enough, I'm too stupid, I can't do that. So that internal monologue then led to the girls often not pushing and having a career. And it would have taken energy in the past. I mean, how many medical schools had a lot of girls in the past? None, probably. Just a very low percentage of female medical school students. So that's, one could say, a relatively mild form, but also I remember a patient on an inpatient psychiatric ward who was hearing the voice of his father, a psychotic patient, hearing the voice of his father saying, you're worthless. And my guess is probably that happened. So just emotional abuse may create a fertile ground for not only people not pursuing a career, but emotional abuse may even create a fertile ground to psychosis. Later on, like that man who was hearing the voice of his father saying, you're worthless. And our internal dialogues, I think we've all had them. But once we pay attention to them, then we have the option of shifting them. And that's where psychotherapy is crucial, in my opinion. So especially as a child, a lot of people as children never had psychotherapy. In previous decades, it was not very common at all for a child to be in psychotherapy. I'm not remembering any friend of mine that I'm aware of growing up who was in psychotherapy. So, and in hindsight, I wish I had been in psychotherapy as a child. With a good therapist, that would have been very helpful. So these internal dialogues definitely can be quite harmful, but we have the opportunity, once we are aware of them, to change them. And I think a lot of children may not be very aware of what they're telling themselves chronically. They're essentially torturing themselves, and I'm not saying that in a demeaning way, not in a judgmental way. It's not their fault that they're torturing themselves. Of course, they're being bullied, and that can lead to that. But if we can shift our internal dialogue, for example, with the bullying, if the person being bullied, the child being bullied, realizes, wow, this is not really my problem. This is the bully's problem. The bully is acting like that because they have a problem, and often their problem is that they were abused, of course. But that's no excuse, because a lot of people have been abused and do not go on to abuse or bully other people. So having been abused is no excuse, but for the child to realize, oh, that person who's bullying me may well have been abused themselves, and that's why they're acting like that. Okay, I'm not the problem. I'm not the primary problem. I have a problem secondarily because of what's happening to me. So it's like a woman who's being beaten by her boyfriend. The primary problem is not her, but of course she's having a problem because she's being beaten. But once we realize that type of thing, that the primary issue is not with us, then our internal dialogue can change.
It's a very fascinating subject, because I mean it's actually proven. I mean, these severe forms of traumatization can lead to psychotic process and actual schizophrenia. I mean, that itself proves how serious this issue is.
Yeah.
And the phenomena of internal monologue is obviously fascinating because it can get obviously very philosophical. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to throw my psychology school under the bus, but we were never like explained properly the thing about internal monologue. We were associated like with psychotic processes, but many neurotic patients have to suffer to this severely punishing the internal monologue. And many think, oh, I'm actually psychotic. No, it's not psychotic. It's your internal monologue. It's just very severe. So many people actually assume that they have become psychotic without necessarily not being like that.
I think we've all had them. So they can lead to various kinds of behaviors. It can even lead to overachievement. So if someone has an internal dialogue, anything less than an A in every class is unacceptable, maybe because their family indoctrinated them or put pressure on them. Oh, you're not lovable unless you get all A's in school. That person down the road may be, quote, an overachiever, but emotionally be suffering quite a bit.
And that's we can see the effects on adulthood of this early traumatization. No, doctor, I'm as far as it goes. We discussed pretty much everything I was said so to discuss. So I'm very happy so far the interview has gone. So excuse me if my English speaking is so rusty.
I found it pretty easy to understand. So thank you for speaking English. I would not have understood much Spanish. It's fun to speak with someone. That's one good thing about the virtual world, that things are very connected. Who would have thought I would speak with someone from Chile like this now?
Thank you so much, doctor.
Right.
Have a nice weekend.
Take care. Bye.
Espero que hayan disfrutado la entrevista con el doctor Goertz. Así que eso de momento, vamos a ver cómo resulta la cosa con los siguientes episodios. Si quieren, obviamente, alguna atención conmigo, me pueden contactar en Doctoralia con mi nombre Mauricio Ibarra, o me pueden encontrar en la cuenta de Instagram psicólogo Mauricio Ibarra. Así que eso de momento, nos vemos, que estén bien.